70 years old. And they said, well, you don't look like you're 70 years old. And that's, I said, because I eat so much Ethiopian food. So, you know, it's very good for you. And I want to just thank you for what I see here as a growing movement that is transcending the ethnic divisions, by which ruling elites in Ethiopia have divided and ruled Ethiopia for so long. And that is what the current government is doing again, and still doing. And you all know that very well. I think the first time really that Genocide Watch got deeply involved with Ethiopia, I had started Genocide Watch in 1999 after leaving the State Department because I realized that we weren't going to get governments to prevent genocide unless there was a mass movement to push them, to pressure them to prevent genocide. And we needed to build institutions that would actually help that happen. But I never forget it, in December of 2003 when I got a call from Saskatchewan, of all places, from a man named Obang Mento, who is sitting right here tonight. And he called me and he said, you know, they have just murdered over 400 people in Gambela City, in Gambela Province. And did you know this? And I said, no, I did not know this. And he, of course, had gotten the news directly from sources there. And I said, well, have you told the people at the State Department about this? And he said, yes, we've told them. And have you told the people in some of the big human rights groups about it? And they, yes, we've told them. All of them have said they don't have anyone that they can, you know, send right now to do something about this. And can you do something? I said, yeah, that's what we're here for. And so I asked him to give me some phone numbers and so forth so that I could call into Gambela Province. And I actually got the governor of Gambela Province. And he corroborated, he told me that this is true. This is exactly what had happened. And that not only the 400 had been murdered, but now many more people had been killed also, and that there were others who had fled, even were beginning to flee into Sudan to escape from this genocide, because that's exactly what it was genocide. And Obang knew that it was a genocide, and that's why he called us. So I, having just worked in the State Department, knew people there, and I called up one of our people there, a desk officer in the State Department who dealt with Ethiopia, and I said, do you know that they just murdered over 400 people in Gambela City? And he said, well, you know, I don't know, I'm not sure. And so I said, well, please, have the ambassador there send someone down to find out if this is true, because I know it is true. I have checked already with the governor and with other people who are already down there in Gambela, and I'm sure that you will find out that it is true. And sure enough, they sent down some political officers with Marine Guards to, and they verified that this was true. And then he asked our ambassador to march into then Prime Minister Melis's office and tell him, you've got to stop this, stop it now. And so she did. We had a very tough ambassador, which I was very grateful for. Oriella Braziel was the name of the ambassador then. Well, this kind of persecution of the Anuak made me realize this was a much bigger problem, because we also sent Obang and another investigator and Later, and a second time, we sent people to investigate what had happened. And they wrote a couple of reports for us. But what I realized was this was not just a problem of the Anuak. This was a problem all over Ethiopia, because the pattern of this Tigrayan-dominated government was that they always would take every important ministry in the government. And in fact, it was a mono-ethnic government in the sense of control. The other ethnic groups were not really given any power in the system. Even though it was supposed to be a federal system, it didn't operate like a federal system. It was a federal system only in name. It was really a centralized mono-ethnic dictatorship. And that's what you still have. Even though now it's not a Tigrayan who is the prime minister, nevertheless, behind every minister is a Tigrayan. And I've seen that before. I mean, I've been in other countries where that was the way the country was ruled. I was in Cambodia, for instance, in 1980, just after the Vietnamese had invaded Cambodia to overthrow the Khmer Rouge. And much to their credit, by the way, I think that what they did was right. But after that, they had a government in which behind every minister there was a Vietnamese advisor. It was essentially a Vietnamese-dominated government. Now the Vietnamese had the good wisdom to withdraw, and so now it's truly a Cambodian government again. But I'd seen this before. I'd seen these kinds of governments which they look like, they're supposed to be multi-ethnic, but they're not. Because behind every person, every minister, there's a person who is in fact of one ethnic group. In that case, it was Vietnamese. Here it's Tigrayan. This is not, of course, democracy at all. And what we realized, Obang and I, was that we needed to form a movement. I mean, he was the one who came up with this idea. A movement that transcended the ethnic divisions in Ethiopia, and that would really build a truly Ethiopian freedom movement. And that's why he started not just the Anuak Justice Council, which he did, but he also started a group called the Solidarity Movement for New Ethiopia. And I think now you have renamed that the December 13th movement or something of that kind. I don't know exactly what the name is right now, but the idea is the same. The idea is for Ethiopia to succeed, it must transcend these ethnic divisions. It's why America has succeeded. It is only recently, actually, that has happened. I mean, our country was also ethnically divided, as you well know. Our history was based on slavery. And slavery is the most complete kind of ethnic division you could ever have. I mean, it is total domination by one race over another. Totally unjust. And it took us, over 2 centuries to finally abolish slavery in this country. So we have a long way to go here too. But what we have shown is that when you have a unified country, ethnic divisions are overcome by a common national identity. Well, that is what is possible in Ethiopia. You have such a rich cultural heritage, one of the most ancient in all of Africa, one of the first countries in the world to ever be Christian, for instance. This is a very special country in Africa. Not only that, of course, the African Union is located in Addis, so you have, it can be an example for all of the rest of Africa if you can overcome these divisions. And I think you can do it. Now, I've worked in other places besides, Africa. one of the places was Ukraine. Some of us saw that the Soviet Union was not forever. We saw that the communist system was fundamentally weak, really. It was flawed. It couldn't last. It was an economic failure, it was a political failure, it was a human rights failure. And we knew that if you could call upon the different nationalities within the Soviet Union to rise up against it, then it would fall. It would dissolve. It would break up. And the key in that case, well, of course, the Eastern European countries were the first to go, Poland especially, because there you had a Polish pope who was able to be an alternative source of authority compared to the Soviet Union. And so Poland was the first place that exploded. But we knew that Ukraine would be the key to the next part, because it's so big, because it's such a source of food and so forth. So what we did in Ukraine was they asked me to be the legal advisor for their independence movement. We used the same methods of nonviolent resistance that we used here in the civil rights movement in the U.S. And I was very involved in that movement here in the U.S. I was taught by the people who were in the group of Martin Luther King, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I went through their training. And believe me, their training was very rigorous. You had to learn how, basically, to withstand someone who was trying to beat you up. That's not a normal thing that you just submit to. If you're a normal human being, you're going to fight back. And what they had to teach us was first to defend ourselves, keep our heads from being bashed in. But we also had, like this, basically, and we also had to learn not to hate back. That was the hard part. How could we not hate back? And the basic ethic of the human rights movement has to be built on that. Now, I'm a Christian, and so for me, it's simply embodying the teachings of Jesus Christ. When he literally said, love your enemies. It's an amazing idea to try to love your enemies. In fact, I had a general who's a member of our church here in McLean say one time in our men's Bible study class that he found the most amazing thing in Christianity was this statement, love your enemies, because he said, that's not the ideology of the Pentagon, I could tell you that. And I said, yes, I know. But what an amazing force it is if it can be brought to bear when you have the people with you, and you can get them organized, and you can get them trained to use nonviolent resistance. There is a moral force that is possible to put to use. It is a channel for God's force, is what it is. It is a channel that brings to bear this force that will literally move mountains, that will literally overthrow governments. Now, I've seen it actually work. When I first went to Ukraine in 1988, they asked me to help get some people out of prison. And they said, what should we do? And I said, well, we should train everybody in nonviolent resistance that we can in the movement. We should also bring in lots of fax machines, because at that time we didn't have the modern internet to use at that time. But fax machines were something that the Soviets really didn't know what to do about. So we had communications media by which we could communicate. Nowadays we have the internet. We have these modern communications media. No dictatorship can withstand the kind of information openness that the internet now allows. They're going to try. They're going to try to break it down. But eventually, it will dissolve the dictatorship. So what we did is we used the fax machine in the same way at that time. And we trained every person in our movement about nonviolent resistance. And they asked me to go to see the people who were being held in prison, who'd been arrested. Would you get this on the floor of Parliament in Ukraine? And so I said, okay, we'll go. But first we're going to have to make sure everyone is not going to react violently to these people, because they're going to try to beat us, I promise you. And we did. We went up. I said we won't get to see them first time. And we didn't get to see them. But I said, then we're going to go back and we'll have a big meeting in the middle of Kiev, the central square. And this was a time when you could hold these meetings. And we'll announce to everyone there that after training in the next week or two, we would be marching down together to that same prison. And we would then demand to see these people who were imprisoned. So we did. We went down, and then they, of course, wouldn't let us see them again. And so we went back to the had a huge demonstration in the middle of Kiev. Now these demonstrations were being held under a huge statue, 80-foot tall granite statue of Vladimir Lenin. There was this sense that the crowd was, you could feel it right there, that there was this power in that group of people. I think the meeting we had that was the most amazing to me was a meeting in which a huge, 5,000 people kind of a meeting in which I was asked to speak. And they told me, you might want to think about this, because they've told us they're going to actually possibly arrest people at this one, and you might get put in prison for 5 years. So you might want to think about whether you want to speak or not. And I said, well, I'll pray about it. And I had a pretty clear idea that I should go ahead and speak. But I also had an idea what I should do. And I got a copy of the American Declaration of Independence translated into Ukrainian. And I read the first 4 or 5 paragraphs of the American Declaration of Independence to that crowd in Ukrainian. Now, those words were written in 1776. They're very old. But they talk about the right of a people to rise up against an oppressive government. They talk about the right of people to overthrow governments that commit torture or that deprive them of their rights or that kill them. It is a revolutionary document. It really is, and it still is today. And I read that to these people, and I tell you, the crowd went wild. It was a wonderful feeling. Here I was, and I knew the KGB wasn't going to arrest me in the center of Kiev for reading the American Declaration of Independence. That would have been a real great international incident if they tried to do that. And they didn't. But what I want to just say is, you here have a very special role to play in the freedom movement in Ethiopia, because it was expatriates from Ukraine, people who had often lived here 50, 60 years, who had made new homes here in the United States, who had pursued their professions here in the United States. They were the people who were able to give us the economic means and the cultural means to support the freedom movement in Ukraine, to send in those fax machines, to provide the organizational support for the freedom movement in Ukraine. That is a role that I know you can play here. because it's very hard for people in Ethiopia to have meetings, I know. And it's also very hard for them to earn enough money to support a movement. Nevertheless, they have to be the ones who will actually hold the meetings there. And you will have to find ways to help them do that. But what was striking to me was how the Ukrainian people here in the United States were able to support Ukrainians in Ukraine. And I think one of the most wonderful experiences in my life was in 1991, standing there in that central square in Ukraine, in Kiev, and watching as they took down that huge 80-foot tall granite statue of Lenin, block by block. And it's not there anymore. So even a system as oppressive and as seemingly impossible to defeat as the Soviet Union was defeated. So you, in fact, can support a movement in Ethiopia that will completely change your country. Now it's going to take, of course, it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take people like you who have the support here, who can organize here, who can think through how Ethiopia should look in the future, who can, because some of us, of course, went back after independence for Ukraine and helped them write a new constitution. I mean, it wasn't the way we wanted it, by the way. We wanted a federalist system. We thought, you know, that the differences between East and West Ukraine and Crimea and so forth would be better if they had a federation, but all that is another story. You have a real special role to play, I think, here. And Washington, D.C., as you know, is one of the places where there are more Ethiopians than anywhere else in the United States. The other place I know, because I went there early on, when Obama and I were working on this movement, way back in, I guess, 2003 or 4, was Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I said, my goodness sakes, it's pretty cold up here. Why do they have all these Ethiopians up there? You know, but tough people, you know. And so there's a lot of people who are there too, and elsewhere also in the U.S. I would just end this by simply saying there's a growing awareness, I think, among human rights groups around the world of the oppression by the Ethiopian government. Consciousness of the world just since 1990 or so has been an increasing consciousness of the human rights violations of governments around the world. They were ignored before, for the most part. Now they are on the front pages of the New York Times and the Washington Post and so many other newspapers every day. That is a new thing. And I think we can have that kind of education and that kind of awareness growing, continuing to grow. We have new ways of communicating. Ethiopian satellite TV, I know, is a big one here in your movement. The internet, of course, makes so many things possible. Genocide Watch is small. We never intended to be big. Our aim when we started was to form a network of a lot of allied human rights groups, of anti-genocide groups that would not, you know, become some kind of new Pentagon or new pyramid of, you know, power. Instead, we would be a network of organizations that were allied together in this struggle for freedom around the world. And it's worked. I mean, we have now 65 or more members in the Alliance Against Genocide, including some very big ones like the International Crisis Group. Each of them has their own agenda, and they all raise their own funds and so forth, but we work together on common objectives. One of which was, for instance, the creation of the Office of the UN Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, which we, Genocide Watch, originally proposed. And I think I'll just end it there because, you know, the man who now heads that office, Adama Dieng, who is Senator Lee's and is a very old friend of mine, has a wonderful name, Adama. Adama, of course, is in his language and in many languages the same word as Adam, which simply means human in Hebrew. Human. That's what Adam means. And that is the way we should be thinking about ourselves. We are all Adam. We are all part of the same human race. And there is only one race, and that's the human race. And that, in fact, is basically the message that we need to teach all of our children, and is what all of us here tonight have to then think about how we can use, because it's a very powerful message for us to use as we fight for freedom in Ethiopia. Thank you very much.